There's a thin line between courage and madness. In September 1704, one man crossed that line and paid the ultimate price. What happened next would defy every expectation of human endurance and inspire generations of storytellers. Welcome to today's journey into one of history's most astonishing tales of survival. A story so incredible that many refuse to believe it was true. Imagine waking up tomorrow completely alone. Not just alone in your house or your neighborhood, but alone on an island hundreds of miles from the nearest human being. No phone, no internet, no way to call for help. Just you, the wilderness, and the crushing weight of total isolation. His name has echoed through history not just as a survivor, but as living proof of humanity's incredible ability to adapt and endure against impossible odds. Today, we're diving deep into this remarkable true story, a tale of desperation, ultimately triumph. Our story begins in the coastal village of Lower Largo, Scotland, in the late 1600s. Born into a world of maritime tradition in 1676, our protagonist grew up hearing tales of distant lands and treasure-laden ships. The sea called to him from an early age, promising adventure and fortune beyond the gray Scottish shores. Like many young men of his generation, he possessed a restless spirit that often clashed with authority. His temperament was fiery, his ambitions grand, and his tolerance for incompetence dangerously low. These traits would both serve and curse him in the years to come. The turn of the 18th century brought opportunity in the form of legalized piracy. European powers, locked in the War of Spanish Succession, issued letters of marque to private vessels, essentially licensing them to attack enemy ships. It was a dangerous work, but the potential rewards were enormous. Gold, silver, exotic goods, all waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to sail into hostile waters. In 1703, our young Scotsman joined an ambitious privateering expedition, leaving from Ireland. The venture was led by an experienced navigator who had already circumnavigated the globe. The fleet consisted of two vessels, the flagship St. George and a smaller galley called the Cinque Ports. Our sailor signed on to the Cinque Ports under Captain Thomas Stradling, a decision that would alter the course of his entire life. The voyage around Cape Horn tested even experienced sailors. This treacherous passage at the southern tip of South America was known as the Sailor's Graveyard, where Pacific and Atlantic Oceans collided in violent chaos. Ships were torn apart by waves as tall as buildings, while freezing winds could snap masts like twigs. Somehow they survived the passage, but tensions were already building. The Cinque Ports had taken significant damage, and our Scottish sailor began voicing serious concerns about the vessel's seaworthiness. Every day brought new leaks, new problems, new reasons to worry. The expedition's fortunes fluctuated wildly. They engaged a French vessel in combat, but failed to capture it, alerting Spanish colonial forces to their presence. A raid on the Panama coast ended in humiliation and retreat. They did manage to capture one merchant ship loaded with valuable supplies, offering a brief respite from their struggles. Our sailor was even given temporary command of this prize vessel, though it was soon released after being stripped of supplies. By May 1704, the partnership between the two ships had dissolved. Captain Stradling took the increasingly damaged Cinque Ports on an independent course, a decision that accelerated their descent toward catastrophe. September 1704 found the Cinque Ports anchored at an uninhabited island called Mas a Tierra, part of the Juan Fernandez archipelago, roughly 400 miles west of Chile. They had stopped to take on fresh water and make repairs, but for our Scottish sailor, this represented a breaking point. The ship was falling apart, worm-eaten timbers, failing pumps, rotting sails. He had repeatedly clashed with Captain Stradling over these issues, and their relationship had deteriorated beyond repair. Standing on that remote beach, watching the crew prepare to depart, he made an announcement that shocked everyone. He would rather take his chances on this desolate island then continue aboard a doomed vessel. Perhaps he expected others to join him. Perhaps he thought straddling would back down. But the captain, seeing an opportunity to rid himself of a troublesome critic and make an example for the remaining crew, immediately accepted the ultimatum. Within hours, our sailor stood alone on the beach with a small pile of possessions. As the Cinque Ports grew smaller on the horizon, the terrible reality crashed down upon him. He ran into the surf, screaming for them to return, but his cries were swallowed by the wind and waves. Those first weeks nearly broke him. The island, roughly 13 miles long and 4 miles wide, was a wilderness of mountains, valleys, and dense vegetation. Strange sounds filled the nights, rustlings, calls, movements just beyond the edge of firelight. Every shadow could hide danger. Every day brought new challenges he was unprepared to face. He initially made camp in a coastal cave, surviving on shellfish and whatever he could scavenge from the beach. Loneliness crashed over him in waves more powerful than those breaking on the shore. He later admitted that suicide crossed his mind repeatedly during this period. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on him every waking moment. But nature forced him to act. As the southern hemisphere's spring arrived, the beaches were invaded by massive sea lions coming ashore to breed. These enormous creatures, some weighing over 600 pounds, made the coastline uninhabitable. He had no choice but to retreat inland, abandoning his cave for the unknown interior. This forced relocation saved his life. The island's interior valleys were far more hospitable than the harsh coast. He discovered groves of cabbage palms, wild turnips, and other edible plants. Fresh water flowed from mountain streams. Most importantly, he found goats, descendants of animals left by previous visitors decades earlier. At first, he hunted these goats with his musket, but ammunition was precious and finite. When his gunpowder finally ran out, he had to develop new strategies. He learned to chase them on foot, developing extraordinary agility as he pursued them across rocky terrain. He constructed elaborate traps and eventually managed to domesticate several kids, creating a renewable source of meat and milk. This transition nearly killed him. During one chase, he pursued a goat too aggressively and tumbled off a cliff. He lay unconscious for an entire day, his fall cushioned only by the goat he had been hunting, which died beneath him. When he finally regained consciousness, he could barely move. For 3 days he crawled back to his shelter, surviving on nothing but willpower. The island presented other dangers. Rats, introduced by ships, had multiplied into vast colonies. These weren't ordinary rodents. They were massive, aggressive creatures that would gnaw on his extremities while he slept. His solution was ingenious. He domesticated some of the island's feral cats, feeding them goat meat in exchange for protection. Soon, he had a small army of feline guardians that kept the rats at bay. As months turned into years, something remarkable happened. The desperate, frightened castaway evolved into something entirely different. His body, hardened by constant physical activity and a simple diet, became incredibly strong and agile. He could outrun goats across volcanic rock barefoot. He could climb trees with the ease of a monkey. When his clothes disintegrated, he fashioned new ones from goat skins. When his knife wore down to nothing, he forged replacements from iron hoops washed ashore from old barrels. He constructed 2 sturdy huts from pimento wood, one for sleeping, one for cooking and food preparation. He maintained a sophisticated system of lookouts and signal fires, never abandoning hope of rescue. His daily routine became almost meditative. Morning prayers from his Bible, which he read aloud to maintain his ability to speak, checking his signal fires, hunting or tending his domesticated goats, scanning the horizon for ships, evening prayers, sleep protected by his cats. This structure kept him sane when isolation might have driven others mad. His vigilance was justified. Ships did occasionally pass, but not all were friendly. The most terrifying incident occurred when 2 Spanish vessels anchored offshore. At first, his heart soared. Rescue at last. But as he approached the beach, he recognized the Spanish flags and uniforms. For an English privateer, capture by the Spanish meant torture and slow death. or worse, a lifetime of slavery in South American mines. He fled into the jungle with Spanish sailors in hot pursuit. Using his intimate knowledge of the terrain and his developed agility, he scrambled up a tall tree with thick foliage. The search party passed directly beneath him multiple times. At one point, several sailors stopped to rest in the tree's shade, so close he could hear their conversations. For hours he remained frozen, barely breathing as they searched the area. Only after their ships departed did he dare descend, shaken by how close he had come to a fate worse than isolation. On February 1st, 1709, after 4 years and 4 months of solitude, 2 ships appeared on the horizon. Their rigging and configuration looked British, but recent experiences had taught him caution. He watched them for hours before deciding to risk signaling. He raced to the beach, lit his largest signal fire, and began waving a white cloth frantically. This time, a boat was lowered. As it approached, he recognized the expedition's pilot. Incredibly, it was the same navigator who had led his original expedition years ago, now commanding a new privateering venture. The landing party was led by a ship's officer named Thomas Dover. They expected to find water and perhaps wild goats. Instead, they found a wild-looking man, covered in goat skins, with hair down to his shoulders and feet hard as horn. He was so overwhelmed with emotion that he could barely speak coherently. The expedition's captain, Woodes Rogers, was fascinated by the castaway's story. He noted in his journal that their rescued islander seemed healthier and more vigorous than many of his crew members, who were suffering from scurvy and other ailments. Readjusting to shipboard life wasn't easy. The rescued sailor had to relearn how to eat preserved food, how to interact with other humans, how to live in confined spaces, but his skills proved invaluable. His ability to catch goats helped the crew recover from scurvy. His knowledge of the island's resources allowed them to fully resupply. Impressed by his abilities and story, Captain Rogers appointed him as the ship's second mate. He threw himself back into privateering with renewed vigor. The expedition raided Spanish settlements along the South American coast, captured valuable prizes, and eventually sailed across the Pacific to the East Indies. When he finally returned to Britain in October 1711, he had been gone for 8 years and had circumnavigated the globe. His story spread rapidly through London's coffee houses and taverns. Writers, journalists, and curious citizens all wanted to hear about the man who had survived over 4 years completely alone. The castaway's experience raised profound questions about human nature and civilization. Some who met him noted that he seemed to struggle with the complexity and corruption of society after his years of simple island life. He would sometimes express nostalgia for the peace and clarity of his isolation, though he never attempted to return. His story captured the imagination of a London writer who transformed it into a novel that would become one of the most published books in human history. Though the fictional version took many liberties with the truth, the core story, of human resilience, ingenuity, and the will to survive, remained intact. The island itself, now known by a different name, has become a destination for adventurous travelers. In 1966, the Chilean government officially renamed one of the Juan Fernandez Islands in honor of its most famous temporary resident. Archaeologists have found evidence of his habitation, tools, structures, and other artifacts that confirm the truth of this incredible story. This tale reminds us that within every human being lies an incredible capacity for survival. When everything we know is stripped away, when we face challenges that seem insurmountable, we can discover strengths we never knew existed. The Scottish sailor who stood on that beach in 1704, watching his ship disappear, had no idea he was about to become a legend. He simply did what humans have always done when faced with the impossible. He adapted, he endured, and ultimately he survived. His story continues to inspire us over 3 centuries later, proof that sometimes the most incredible adventures aren't fiction at all. They're simply what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances and refuse to give up. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey through history. Share your stories in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more incredible tales from the past. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the worst decisions, and sometimes those who seem most alone are actually discovering exactly who they were meant to be.